This conference will now be recorded.
Very good. I have something else to say, so.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, but I don't really have anything.
Okay. Okay, I think we're right about at 9 o'clock. Very cool meeting. As soon as it strikes 9, we'll get started. And I have 9 a.m. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 37th meeting of the Statewide Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling. We have not met since mid-February, before Putin started the war in Ukraine. And you'll see I've got a flag for Ukraine above me. I'm wearing yellow and blue in honor of the Ukrainians. And I just want to say, I really hope that we can have peace in the world, but apparently we can't until we take these autocrats out of office who want to dominate other countries. And I'm so sorry for the people of Ukraine. So I just wanted to say that. And also respecting Commissioner Lapis, his family is from Ukraine. So just honor that. With that, we'll go ahead and get started and I'm not going to do a roll call. I see we do have, Commissioner Bouchard is on, Kadena is in jury duty. Commissioner Davis, I did not see you. I still don't see you, so I guess you're missing. I saw Commissioner Dell, Dunleavy, Ferrante. I don't see Kalpikoff. I think we're missing him as well.
I'm here.
Oh, you are there. Great. Thank you so much. Commissioner Lapis is here. Medrano is here. Commissioner Segura is here. I'm here. Schneider and Sky are here. Toyota, did you join? Yes. So Vice Chair Valier, something happened. He was in the hospital this weekend. He'll be fine, he says. So we'll keep a good thought for him as well, of course. And then Commissioner Ward. So we do have a quorum, and a vast majority. We're missing 3 of the 16. So we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item 2, which is review and potential approval of the meeting notes from our last meeting. Did any commissioners have any proposed amendments or edits to those meeting minutes? I'm not seeing any. And John, Commissioner Davis just arrived. Thank you for joining us.
Move to approve minutes.
Have a second?
Second.
Very good. So I'll assume everybody is okay and thumbs up on the approval of the meeting minutes. Great. Thank you. Unless I hear otherwise, those are approved unanimously. And we will move on to agenda item number 3, which is public comment review for items not on the agenda. And I know that there were a couple of public comments that came in at the very end of our meeting, at the last meeting in February. So I would ask that CalRecycle please read those into the record, and any others that have arrived, please.
Okay, this is Jeffrey James of CalRecycle. After the last meeting, there was an unread comment from Gail Bryce with XT Green. The comment is, hi, in the report status comments, Chairperson Sanborn quickly mentioned the status regarding carpet and flooring. I believe they included legislation and recommendations. Could you please expand on this?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I did read her comment, and I did not say that. Actually, in the meeting minutes, it even captured it, that we're not taking any further action on carpet, at least at this point. The policy's already been adopted and it's moving. So thank you, Gail, for that question, but I don't believe I said that, and that wasn't captured in the minutes as well. So I think we're okay to move on from that comment.
Okay, we have 2 comments that came in prior to the meeting today from Shirley Fredericks with Nevada County Waste Not. The first comment, good morning. I give meetings on plastics in Nevada County and nationwide. People are always surprised to know that all that is put in recycling bin is not really recycled. The response is, why bother? I encourage reduction and alternatives, but the big problem is the lack of processing facilities. Are you making progress on getting some all over the state? When? This is crucial to reduction success, as you know. Her second comment is, I give programs on plastic reduction in Nevada County and nationwide with the Elders Action Network. People are always surprised when they find out that all they put in their recycle bins is not really recycled. The response is, why bother? I tell them why we must bother, offer alternatives, and explain the importance of clean and dry. The hang-up seems to be lack of reprocessing facilities. I know you were working to get some going here and streamline permitting. What is the status now? This is a critical piece, as you know. Thank you for pushing more on this. End of comment.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're trying. That's what the commission was set up to do, is help find markets for these materials, and we're working very hard on that. We appreciate your comments and reminder of how important this work is on the ground for the people that are trying to figure out our recycling system. Unless any commissioners wanted to say anything else to that.
I just briefly that this is a production issue. The problem is we have an overproduction, overabundance of plastics that will not find markets as long as there's no connection between the market demand and the production of those.
And I'll second that and say, I don't think that focusing on end-of-pipe solutions is the optimum answer. In California, we have a real lack of fresh water, and plastic recycling facilities take a ton of fresh water. They also take a lot of energy. We've now got research coming out that microplastics are being generated in mechanical recycling facilities. So we need to be very careful about pushing for more processing of plastic waste in California, and ask ourselves, to Commissioner Ward's point, would it be better to not use the plastic in the first place?
And I'll just put an exclamation point on all of that by saying the reminder that in 1990, the legislature tasked us with source reduction first, then recycling and composting, and then disposal. And that still remains the law, so source reduction first. Thank you all. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on from public comment and go to agenda item number 4. Our first item, which is Commissioner Sky did a lot of work on this. I did minor edits, and it is the presentation on design for recycling policy. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Commissioner Sky.
Thank you so much. And I first want to thank Commissioner Ward for helping bring up the latest draft of the document. What I'll do, since we went through this last time, is just highlight the edits that we made based on feedback from the commission. I just want to say thanks to everyone that provided really great feedback on this. And I think we can go through it relatively quickly. This is something that I think is very consistent with both other policies that the commission has worked on, and we've made reference to, and you'll see that in this document, all the commissions that tie into this, and very much aligned with what we were just talking about, the fact that we really need to prioritize source reduction and prevention strategies, upstream strategies wherever possible. I think that's a very important priority for the commission, and appreciate your support for this policy.
Are we considering this the first hearing? Just, I mean, I don't mind if, I think we should hear it several times if we want to, but I think it was the second, because we already heard and got some feedback.
If we did, that's my bad. So this is second?
Yes.
Thank you.
Like I said, we've got some time, so I wouldn't mind if we hear it several times to make sure we get it right, but.
Absolutely. So most of the background, I think, is intact. And Ted, you can scroll down to where you see the first major edits. Some of these are just minor grammatical fixes that we're catching along the way. The list, I think we were wanting to reflect the list that was approved, and then we can certainly add on to it. In terms of the FTC green guides, which are cross-referenced with federal and state laws, we added, if you can scroll up just a little bit, Ted. So we moved that reference to the end of the policy, and then we added some products and materials no longer have local markets. For example, packaging using plastics number 337 contaminate the waste stream, yet they continue to be labeled with the chasing arrows. We also added a specific reference to SB 1335. Again, this is work the commission championed, CalRecycle is still in the process of developing the list of food service packaging that are reusable, recyclable, and compostable. And per SB 343, which was just signed into law, we will be further improving labeling practices by July 2025. So this section is just reflecting we're in this transitional period where the regulations for a new law will address some of these issues, and we want to build on that. And then we added, as required by PRC section 42005.5, the Commission is charged with identifying products that are recyclable and compostable and regularly collected in curbside programs. And we developed the 7 criteria to determine recyclability. So this section is just referencing work we've already done. A lot of the edits and feedback from Commission is to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel or repeating things that are already addressed. So we're pointing to the work that was already done and identifying the basis for defining what is recyclable, what is compostable. And to the extent that this list changes in the future, this reference will still be valid. We updated this section to point out the Commission adopted recommendations. We listed this particular policy 2130 for labeling products. And again, we want to point to that recommendation. We're hoping that it is implemented, whether by CalRecycle or the legislature, to make it clearer for consumers to identify which products are recyclable or compostable based on these updated guidelines. And we're pointing to the system that we're recommending, that it would have 3 parts: product labels, curbside lists, and curbside bin labeling. So you're seeing it on the product at the point where you're trying to recycle, compost, or dispose of products, depending on where they are, and then maintaining the list so it's easy for consumers to make the right choice. And then the last sentence: the product cannot be claimed or labeled recyclable or compostable unless the products are on statewide compostable or recyclable lists, which require credible and legal markets for recyclables or verified degradation in California composting facilities. So that's, again, pointing to the recommendations that we had already made. The purpose for this particular policy largely remained the same. We added some text if you scroll down to the 3rd paragraph.
I think we misspelled labeling there.
Oops,
It's underscored.
Yeah. Thank you. So we mentioned this policy does not intend to define which products fall into recyclable, compostable, or hazardous categories, as those definitions are currently defined in other regulations and criteria. What is recyclable or compostable is already discussed in the following policies. So we reference the different areas where we're already pointing to these issues, including our the label policy, as well as the definition policies that we had developed. The rest of this section, I think, is mostly the same. And let me just pause just to make sure if there are any comments or questions, feel free to pause me or jump in.
I'm not seeing anything.
So in terms of the actual proposal, we made some refinements. Again, we are talking about the prohibited unnecessary products list, and our recommendation in this proposal is to use a PAX list as a start and have CalRecycle develop a simple statewide list of products and materials that are prohibited for sale in California unless they are redesigned, and to periodically update the list and cross-reference it with a list of compostable and recyclable materials and products under EPR programs and hazardous materials and products. We updated the 2nd recommendation of the proposal. The PUP list shall be cross-referenced with California's list of hazardous waste and materials defined by DTSC, the California statewide recyclable list, and that's the one that we're recommending be developed. Scroll up a little bit, Ted. And then the compostable list that's being developed per policy 2130. So these are all still in development, but we're hoping that once they're established, that can be a source for developing the prohibited list. CalRecycle is advised to develop a simple, understandable statewide acceptance list and graphics that are consistent with the statewide compostable, recyclable, and hazardous list. So it's easy for everyone to view the information online, and then what they're seeing on the products is consistent with that as well. The definitions for these different terms, hazardous, recyclable, and compostable. Sorry, scroll up a little bit, Ted. Right there. Those definitions need to be consistent with CalRecycle's timeline for complying with the 2018 Act, and also to extent SB 343 as well. We might want to add that to this section as well. I was thinking 343, because that'll affect the labeling. And then the third recommendation, that the list should not have materials or products on California's list of hazardous waste and materials defined by DTSC. So keeping those lists separate.
And every year there's an SB 343, so we should put it from 2021 in parentheses.
Thank you. So I don't see any hands raised or comments. The second part of the proposal would be to ensure designing for recyclability is consistent with the labeling policy. So we're making sure that we're referencing what the commission's already adopted. That's 2130, the label system for products and post-consumer management. And we're just summarizing briefly what that proposal discussed, which is 3 parts, as I mentioned earlier: labels, acceptance lists, and curbside bin labeling. We can scroll down. Just minor changes to the third proposal, which is enforcement and monitoring. CalRecycle will periodically evaluate if various products should be added or removed. And this is the same thing we discussed with the compostable and recyclable lists for products that we're proposing to prohibit from being sold or marketed in the state. We should update them periodically based on technological advancement, upgrades, and MRFs, so that we're up to date. Those were the major changes that we made to the document. I don't think there's anything else if you scroll further down to the end. Yes.
Commissioner Sky, I had a couple. Since I don't see anything in the chat, I'm just going to, under purpose on page 3, we talk about the purpose of this policy recommendation is to end contaminants to curbside recycling by outright banning the manufacture and sale of and distribution of non-compostable, non-recyclable products and materials, adhesives, embedded batteries, and composite materials that do not serve an essential function and can be substituted by alternatives. Embedded batteries is, of course, a huge issue for our providers. It's also a proliferating material. I mean, there's a lot more products that have embedded batteries. So I just want to clarify for everybody what this means. My understanding is that this means if it is not a necessary essential function, like your shoes lighting up, or your balloon must sing, or your holiday card must sing, those things would go away. Is that correct?
That's the intent.
Right. So I just want everyone to understand the gravity of what we're saying here and how big this is, because I've been saying this for a long time. We are creating horrible hybrid materials that are going to the market with no checks and balances, and then trying to fix it at the back end, which is cost prohibitive. And quite frankly, we'll never be able to do it. It's just too much. So this is a very, very big deal. And I think we should think through some case studies of what this actually will look like. But those were 3 examples that came to mind when I read it that I think are very powerful. And those things are unnecessary. And there are companies who will not like it. And I think we have to just discuss that very openly and invite those companies to share their concerns. but we're at a point that this is not sustainable, the way things are coming at us, and we've got to change something. So Commissioner Ward.
Can I just very briefly just build on that? I want to emphasize how important this policy is. You know, the balance that we have there for, I'll just pick on greeting cards with batteries embedded in them. People are buying those. Maybe they're thinking about the fact that there's some kind of electronics in there. They have no idea how that product will end up after they give it to someone as a gift. And then once that person receives it, they're very likely to put it in with other paper products in their recycling bin. What happens to that material at the end of the life? And what's the value, the balance in providing that opportunity for some kind of a voice in that greeting card, which people see as essentially disposable and is often labeled with recyclable on the paper portion of that product. So this is a big deal. I expect that there'll be a lot of pushback from industry, but we need to set intentions based on the design and that balance.
And whoever CO, if you could please mute yourself. I hear a little background noise. Thank you very much. So I think it's Commissioner Ward, then Lapis, Oseguera, and Medrano.
Thank you. I think this is a wonderful direction for policy and really complementary to the waste prevention policy that we had, recommending CalRecycle have a producer-focused outreach to reduce the introduction of contaminants. But I also want to acknowledge that it's a big ask, that it's very hard for any government agency to voice concern or express outright bans of products that are already on the market, and it's going to be hard. But I think it's the appropriate discussion, because we have to wrestle through these things, because the greeting card's a great example. There's all these unintended consequences after market where those materials just can't be managed safely anymore. We need to find ways in which we're not passing the hazards along further down the street. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to ask CalRecycle if you could please mute whoever CO, because I don't think they know their mic is open. Just for everybody's, sometimes we broadcast things we don't want to, and just for their own safety. Commissioner Lapis.
Thank you for putting this together. I think it's a huge improvement over last month's version. I actually missed the battery thing altogether when I was reading through it ahead of time. I love that addition. My only thought was, I'm not sure if embedded battery is the right word. I think what we're talking about are consumer removable batteries, right? So batteries that a consumer cannot readily remove. I mean, thinking of cell phones, there are plenty of cell phones that at least used to come with batteries that were embedded, but easily replaceable. And now they're glued in. So maybe we want to clarify that, embedded and not readily removable. But I agree, and I think this is great. Thank you.
Well, I guess I would follow up on that saying, you might be able to remove the battery out of that card, but I've done it, and it's a lot of work. You got to rip that thing to shreds, and they are glued in there. And then we have these balloons that sing, that have electronics. It's like flying e-waste. It's bananas. And I can't believe it's even on the market, but it's there. And I mean,
yeah, maybe.
What are we trying to capture and making sure those lines are really clear?
Yeah, maybe let me, I think that highlights two different categories here. We have inherently disposable products that should not have batteries embedded in them. And then we have durable goods where batteries should be removable, replaceable by consumers. Is that a fair summary?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe we say something that anything that is quote unquote disposable that has battery be banned. That's basically
let's separate that. Yeah, so maybe embedded batteries in disposable products.
We've kind of already said that in the HHW policy as well, because we said if it isn't necessary and there's an alternative, it shouldn't be on the market. And disposables like for example, with vaping products, they make reusables, rechargeables. They don't need to be on the market.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody
Are
will
you
die
su-
without singing balloon.
Are we talking about adding another bullet, or is it okay as it is?
I think we should make a note that Kobe and I go back and revisit these definitions, because I think it raised a really good point, but that's why I wanted to highlight this embedded batteries, because it's so complicated. We have to really think through what exactly we're recommending.
I concur that I think it's a good idea to have a separate bullet addressing the battery issue on single-use products, because there are enough complications that it's worth that extra effort.
So Commissioner Sky, should you and I take that back and just maybe flesh out that battery part a little bit more, since it is so complicated? Okay.
I think Nick raised a good suggestion to clarify those two categories, and both of them are problematic for different reasons.
Agreed. I think it's Commissioner Osigura next, and then Medrano.
Yeah, it was just a question, Chair Sandberg. I think everyone's making very good points. It's, you know, the ease of being able to get to the battery, right? So when we talk about redesign, because I think, you know, Commissioner Abbas makes a good point, all of you have, right? But it's how do you get to them? It seems like it's just getting harder and harder to get to where the battery was. I think in the past, products with the traditional batteries from the past, right, it was either a screwdriver and one screw, and there was the battery, right? So you could take it out, recycle it, or things of that nature. It just seems that nowadays, it takes, you know, an engineering degree to understand where it is. And so just wanted to, I mean, we're also talking here about redesign. And if folks want to continue to have products out there, then redesigning to make sure that we can get to and folks can recycle those materials. And so anyway, I'm glad that we're looking at how do we define it so that we also send a message in the marketplace of you really have to give a thought of how to get to these batteries if you still want to have an X product. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Good point. I think some of these are lithium ion, which we now know when damaged create a lot hotter spark and fire. So I think they're gluing them in just to keep them from moving around, is my suspicion. But that's great for the user. It's not great for the end-of-life management system. So Commissioner Medrano, and then Davis, please.
Really quickly, one item. The first item is on the whole on this whole paragraph. Purpose is just super long. No, you were there already. So you might need to break that up. Just it's a grammar thing. It's just one whole sentence there. And second, perhaps we should consider not even addressing embedded, just adding added or included batteries, because that kind of gives us and takes us into another definition. My opinion here, because embedded, if we just add added, we know that added batteries are a problem here in these products. So I think we should take the authority to, and again, it's a big ask, but to request that batteries are not included in a lot of these products that are contaminating our recycling streams.
Maybe what we could say based on that is if the product does not have an established stewardship or EPR program that has a battery, that that's not easily removable and recyclable, that is.
I would even get away from easily removable or just added batteries in general. I mean, do we really need batteries in products that are going to contaminate our recycling streams?
Well, I think the industry is going to argue that the people want things that are charged.
And that's also to the point of using the description of necessary. What is not necessary to us is probably necessary to the consumer based on what the producer wants to make. But
okay, thank you. We're gonna have to keep thinking on this, I think. Commissioner Davis?
Yeah, I do hope we'll continue to work on this policy after today. There's a difference between products and materials, and I think there's a tendency to conflate the two, but there's a lot of products that are multi-material that have that multi-material threshold makes something unrecyclable. I'm not sure we're talking about that. There's, this discussion is mainly about the hazardous impacts of batteries. But so I really want to read this again more carefully, and maybe we need to take a different track on products away from materials and hazardous components of products like batteries. So it's a big it's a big lift.
So you're suggesting maybe we have a whole separate policy around the batteries under the hazardous waste?
I mean, the batteries are hazardous, right? And you're going to have, even if you could remove them from a product, you still need to deal with the battery. You don't tell people now throw the battery into the landfill. So yeah, it's still a battery issue, but it's also a product design issue. And again, I think we shouldn't conflate materials and products. That I'd have to go back and look more carefully at 343. I think it's more material based, but we're buying products. You're not going out and I want a polypropylene container that's filled with yogurt. You want yogurt, right?
Okay, I think what I'm hearing, because we have a very short meeting and a lot of people have to leave. I think what I'm hearing is maybe what we do is we take the batteries, we reference them in this policy and say, but they're considered hazardous and they're going to therefore be in the hazardous waste policy, which we're discussing actually next. Does that, or the one after?
Well, but the policy is still about recyclability. So I just, I don't know how I don't know how we get there, but we shouldn't rush. I think we should.
We're not.
Try to incorporate changes from today, come back. So.
Okay, well, so I don't see anybody else in the chat, and we've got a very full agenda and a lot of people have to leave early. So I would suggest that we accept the changes that were made, and Commissioner Sky and I look at this again with the battery discussion in mind, but that's why I highlighted it, because I know how complex it is. I just want to make sure we get this right, and we'll try something else. We'll think about it, how do we define these things and break them out the way maybe Commissioner Lapis mentioned. And we'll bring it back, third reading, cleaner, more focused on the areas that we're concerned about, if that's okay with the commissioners. Is there anybody who sees a different path for this one?
Chair Sanborn, I just want to add, I think we're on the right path. If a product makes it easy to separate the batteries are then hazardous waste and are treated separately. It's the products that glue them in and make it impossible to access. That's what this policy needs to address, because it's that design component.
Agreed. So we'll update it to address it that way. Yeah. And accept all the changes so it's a lot cleaner. Okay, very good. So we'll
one other quick thought on that. Again, I think it's a great policy idea, but as you're developing this, I see the focus on the lists and the materials as the priority, and I just want you to think about the mechanism for training product designers. I think is the main result of this policy, and so thinking about how do we craft that so that we get into the designer's head so that they know what's okay and what's not. Because we're not trying to pick a fight. We're trying to be clear in communication about what's okay and what's not. And so it's that forum, that framework, that educational mode, however that happens, that professional degree, that's the important thing here, and establishing that as the official channel for how you do things in California.
Commissioner Schneider.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, bit of a cold today. I agree with Commissioner Ward in terms of training, but a lot of products are introduced by amateurs and or entrepreneurs on that. So I would only, when you bring this back, could you think about how it might be enforced? And maybe that would be a good addition to the project, to the paper.
Thank you. I mean, one of the thoughts I've had for many years is the need to have some sort of a group like this that's at the back end of the system that literally when there's some brand new thing that's coming to the market is presented to the group to make sure that we know that it's coming and we know how to manage it and give feedback to the manufacturers, because I've always said you can't close the loop on the material if you don't even have a conversation between the front end and the back end of the system. There's no way to get to a circular economy the way we've been isolating ourselves in silos, but that's a different conversation. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap this one up if it's okay, so we can get on to the other items. We've got really good feedback, and we'll bring this one back on the next agenda for a third reading. Keep updating and improving it. And thank you everyone for your attention to this, and thank you especially to Commissioner Sky for all your hard work. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and move on. Do we have any public comments on this item? James, Jeffrey?
There are no comments that have come in.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item number 5, which is eliminating toxics and additives in plastic containers policy discussion. I believe this was Commissioners Dell and Don Levy. And Don Levy was missing at the last meeting, so we held it off for this meeting. So did you want to take this over, Commissioner Don Levy or Dell?
Sure, I'll take the lead on this. Thank you. Commissioner Sky, well done on the last policy. That's a good segue into this policy. What you were talking about before covers so many items. With this, we're gonna take it down to tree level, and we're just gonna focus on impacts to bottles in the bottle bill, products that we're drinking. Plastics are all different types of products that are out there. The scientists and the engineers are creating newer and newer bottles made of different material these days. And unfortunately, about 20% of the plastics that are out in the waste stream are a concern. Some of them can be very, very toxic. CalRecycle and the Beverage Container Fund has invested at this point over $100 million in California reclaiming facilities. And what this policy will help do is protect those investments and then remove toxic plastics from the beverage container program. Bottles can have different polymers in them, multi-layer plastics. They'll use those to increase shelf life, but unfortunately they could have a toxic effect when we're drinking the beverage, or worse, it could have a harmful effect for the reclaimers when they're trying to reclaim and recycle the material. So the most common one, a PET bottle that's out there, very recyclable here in California. But there's a lot of additives that they could put in those bottles. They could put barrier materials. They could put PLAs, which are polyoxides, PFEs, or PHAs. The hard time saying this one, polyhydroxy. Can't say this word. They're bioplastics, so they're coming up with water and plastic bottles that are plant-based, and they're saying that they are biodegradable, but they ultimately have bioplastics in them that can be harmful. But ultimately, they look just like a water bottle or a soda bottle. They get in with those that are recyclable, and they cause problems for the reclaimers in that process. That ultimately creates an additional cost for those reclaimers. But the biggest component that we're trying to say that we want to ban is PVC plastics from the beverage container program. PVC components, including the bottles, lookalike bottles, and labels. So PET bottles in the program today, using 2020 data from CalRecycle, there was only 440,000 PVC bottles, number 3 bottles in the program, out of 26.2 billion bottles. So I don't think this is going to be a big ask to tell those 440,000 bottles, which is 0.00001 of the program to switch to something else. But what we don't know is how many of those bottles have PVC labels in them. PVC is a toxic. At 50 parts per billion, it can create a health hazard. PVC, it sinks just like PET. It acts like PET, so they can't do the separation at the reclaimers, and it melts at the same temperature as the PET bottles. So the reclaimers, and I don't know if you can see this following Commissioner Dell's lead, kind of a show and tell. The reclaimers, they have to take samples of their PET throughout the process, and it turns it brown or black, and it indicates that there's PVC in there. When they find PVC in the batches that they're running, they have to throw the entire batch out because they realize it is that harmful and that dangerous. So any little trace, they end up throwing out big sections of their process. And that ultimately reflects in their costs, disposal, and what they could ultimately pay for the material. So it decreases what they can pay because their costs ultimately go up. So the policy proposal that we're looking at, and again, it's strictly focused on beverage containers in the bottle bill, is to prohibit all PVC components, including caps, bottles, and labels from items in the bottle bill. Having a ban on PLAs, PEFs, PHAs that are bioplastics and other components that look like a good bottle, but they just can't be recycled these days. Not in California. They end up as a reject and get thrown out. But again, they do pose a health hazard that we want to eliminate. We have plastic bottles, number 7, which are a conglomerate of many different types of plastics. And just like we were talking about the policy before, you could have a greeting card with many other things in it, whether it's batteries or plastics. The multi-material items just cannot be recycled. So telling beverage manufacturers, go to a beverage container that can be recycled. Aluminum can, PET bottle, number 2 bottle, glass bottle. We have a great infrastructure in California, in the United States, to recycle what can be recycled, and that's aluminum, PET, number 2 plastic, and glass bottles. That can all go bottle to bottle. So we want to promote that. Looking at a minimum, APR has design guidelines, especially for PET, that we would like bottle manufacturers to adhere to. Right now, they're just recommendations, but we would like to have that a little more enforceable, so they actually comply with those. We have
I would say there's not a little more. It's either enforceable or it's not. So we have to, if the policy is going to say we recommend that this be part in law, if they have a requirement that they meet these guidelines, we should say that, because there's no little.
Okay. We have a water bottle company in Hawaii that is still using PVC labels. So all the water bottles in the bottle bill from Hawaii, because they're contaminated with this one water bottle company's PVC label, has a very difficult time of finding a home to recycle that material. In California, we're trying to limit those, and identifying PVC labels is very, very difficult. It's bottle to bottle. You have to find sensors and testers to find those.
Can I do a show and tell? Can I do a show and tell now?
Sure, and then Commissioner Ward had his hand up.
So in looking into this, as we created this, Commissioner Dunleavy's in this business. So he sees these PVC labels, he sees the problems, and we hear from PET recyclers, this is bad, and we know all the science about if PVC ends up in PET, It creates acidity, which actually creates benzene that can end up in the PET as well as in the recycling operation, so it's all bad. So I went and collected a large sample of different kinds of bottles from different stores that are in the beverage program, and then Commissioner Dunleavy's has the kind of device that sees what kind of plastic each thing is. And this one, for example, is a PVC label, and it's in the deposit system. And this one is some sort of like glass component label, right, that's in the system. So these aren't, you know, our major brand manufacturers making these, they're imported, but we need to have these stopped. These can't be used because, again, you get to like one flake in a bale and you're over the limit of what's safe. So the requirement, to be clear, the requirement that nothing can be imported with a PVC label or PVC component should be a requirement. I think, to clarify, Commissioner Sanborn, on your point, the requirement would be the API guidelines as a minimum, but we may need to go stronger because some of those aren't that strong or they're not that specific. There's some sort of wiggle room. For example, saying absolutely no PVC. And so we have the word required in there. And I don't actually think it would be hard for the vast majority to meet. But it's the ones like this that we need to get strict on. And it was a big store that sold this, and the stores need to get involved, make sure that the products they're putting on their shelves are compliant with this.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. On the whole, I think this is a very good proposal. I think it's worth adding a paragraph in the background section about the bioplastics. Just conceptually, in my mind, if there was a way to swap out actual bioplastics for the plastics that are flooding the market, would be inclined to do that. But the reality is that these are a very, very, very small fraction of the overall market and functionally a contaminant. But I think it's worth not adding that background paragraph, explaining why it is a contaminant and why, for all of the benefits that are touted by the manufacturers of those materials, that on a practical basis, they're not really helping the system currently. And then second, I really think on item 6, where it says all additional toxic causing components and additives, I think you really need to identify an agency or a process by which those are identified, because that to me is not clear what we're pursuing or pushing or advocating.
Thank you. Commissioner Kalbakoff just got here. Thank you for joining us. I have a question, actually. Is there a reason we're limiting this to the bottle bill? I mean, this stuff is so toxic. Why is it allowed to be in the food packaging stream at all anyway?
This is what we're drinking. I mean, it's focused on the bottle bill. We didn't want to expand it to other items at this point, but just as a first step, because the bottle bill is funding many of the California reclaimers. They've invested in them with grants every year to help them operate. This would get a return on that investment by helping them reduce their costs, because yes, it's a very small percentage of the bottles that are out there, but it increases the cost for those reclaimers.
I see the problem. I'm just wondering why wouldn't expand to, because I've heard that they're selling pretzels in these big PVC containers, which just blows my mind, that we're putting food and toxic materials.
I actually have one. I have one of those. I have one of those in my cupboard. Actually, Schneider's of Hanover sells it. It's owned by Campbell Soup. But we thought about that, Commissioner Sanborn. But then you start opening this up to a bigger and bigger and bigger snowball kind of monster around food packaging, and it gets bigger and bigger and harder to implement. And this is such a critical need right now. It's so achievable to make one discrete, focused policy, get it into place, have success with it, and then use that as a success and learnings from it to then take it out and take it to a larger market. I think it complements well with the policy that Commissioner Sky proposed, because that sort of gets at, oh, no PVC pretzel containers or some other things. But this is just discrete, doable, implementable in the short term.
Thank you. I just again, want to talk about all the different policies, and I think that makes good sense. Because when I found out just recently that PVC containers were actually covered by the bottle bill, I was horrified. I did not know that. And there shouldn't be any that's getting funds from the state, in my opinion. But so I really like this policy. So anybody else? Commissioner Lapis?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. You know, on the whether or not something's included in the bottle bill, I want us to be careful because we don't want to say that it's out of the bottle bill, because that's actually an incentive for manufacturers to use that type of packaging. Right now, if you're using, you know, one of the unrecyclable types of packaging, you have to pay pretty heavily into the program on top of your deposit. And so if we say you can't be in the program, that actually is an incentive to make more of those packages. But I do think we should straight up ban, you know, the PVC, and I'm with you, Heidi, in terms of it should be all food contact. It should not be just beverage containers. You know, the PLAs and PHAs are an interesting issue. I think they are a design for recyclability issue, not necessarily a toxicity issue. So maybe they should be an example in the previous policy, not necessarily in this one. I mean, PLA performs very similarly to PET as far as I know, from a toxicity perspective, and even from a recycling perspective, if they had the infrastructure, but they don't. And right now it's only a contaminant in the PET stream. So that's really a design for recyclability issue. Same thing with the PHA water bottles. And then in terms of, I can't remember if it was Ted or somebody mentioned the idea of an agency getting involved. I really like that idea. I would love to not feel like we are charged with reviewing a bunch of toxicology data and have an agency like OEHA be able to take on, you know, be able to be the referee and say, you can't use this because it's toxic. And I think the problem with advocates proposing specific product types is that we are sort of coming after the fact, after it's already a known problem. And if an agency were involved early on, they could nip some of these in the bud before they even made it to market.
So is your suggestion to amend this policy to have some sort of a vetting by OEHA that nothing gets into the food packaging stream without being approved as safe by OEHA?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't want to hijack the existing policy, but I think that does make sense as a good policy. And again, all the APR design guidelines, I mean, all of that is really about design for recyclability, so it should really fit into the previous one. The outcome should be the same, where you shouldn't be able to use, make design decisions that make your product unrecyclable. But I just don't want to conflate toxicity, because if somebody can convince us that their, you know, unique 5 different blend of plastic bottle is not toxic, then it should be okay. It's still not okay. So I just don't think it's helpful to conflate the toxicity with the recyclability.
So are you suggesting a separate policy then about the OEHA vetting things before it gets into packaging?
Whatever the will of the group is on that, I think it can go in here, but I also don't want to hijack this proposal. I do think at a very minimum, several of these could be moved to the previous item.
Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. OEHHA, yeah, OEHA.
What if we change this one to be designed for recyclability and safety of beverage bottles and put it all into one?
We can.
Well, we could keep this narrow to the bottle bill and ask that OEHA approve any kind of material that goes into the bottle bill program. That's the beginning of expanding it to all the packaging, right?
But again, we don't want to say that if you're not in compliance, then you can sell your product and not be part of the bottle bill. that just
That-
creates.
No, I
That's
think
not
the
what-
intent is, yeah, the intent is you don't get to sell the product.
Yeah, go into something that is recyclable and safe.
So
So they
then
would
the
have to
suggestion wouldn't necessarily be the bottle bill, it would be the limits on what you can sell beverage containers in.
Beverage containers that are covered by the bottle bill, correct?
I feel like we might be talking past each other a little bit. I feel like if we say covered under the bottle bill, then by definition, you can sell them as long as they're not covered under the bottle bill. Which, again, I think creates a perverse incentive to do the opposite of what we want.
So somewhere this is semantics. Somewhere there's a definition of what types of bottles should be in the bottle bill, right? And those types of bottles would be what's relevant in this. And so they would not be allowed to be. You couldn't use them anymore. That's the intent.
Meaning you couldn't sell them in California.
The scope of what's in the bottle bill is not based on packages, based on the product itself.
Correct.
Right.
But
So you
can't
couldn't
sell,
package.
yeah, you can't sell the product in a number 3 bottle or use a PVC label or other components in your packaging that sells beverages in the beverage container program. Very, very focused.
Again,
I agree, Steve, expanding it to the pretzel containers, expanding it to other food containers. I think that would be the next step on this. We were just trying to be very focused on the small component of contaminants of the beverage containers in the program and just have them stop. The next step would be expanding it to other products outside of the beverage container program.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with saying products in the beverage container program because I think it'll lead to increased use of the things to get out of the program.
But then they wouldn't be able to sell their beverages.
That's a different point. It's not a. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding. Maybe we're saying the same thing.
We
I think it's like-
are. You wouldn't be able to sell your yogurt drink at all in PVC 3, period. So that doesn't, if you put it in PVC, it wouldn't take it out of the bottle bill. You just wouldn't get to sell it at all.
Yeah,
Which means it
I'm
would
on
be
board
in
with
the bottle because they're not allowed to sell it. Does that make
So,
sense?
Nikki,
I
do
think
you oppose that they wouldn't get to
No.
sell it in PVC at all?
I totally am on board with that. I just
Okay, that's
Not
the
sure it's a bottle
intent
bill.
of what we're trying to get to. So they'd
We're
switch to
saying you can't sell
ATP,
beverages.
PP.
we're saying you can't sell beverages in XYZ packaging. The
Correct.
bottle bill is sort of irrelevant, and I'm not saying this to defend the bottle bill. I'm saying it to
yeah,
not.
there's no incentive for them to do it if they're not going to be able to sell it at all.
Right.
Right. Okay, Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, I was just trying to make sense of the discussion, and I think I agree with that last statement that it's, you know, there are beverages that don't fall under the program, and I don't believe we want to say it's okay to sell those beverages in containers that have toxic material. So I think we need to be careful narrowing the focus to the bottle bill. We're really talking about the containers for all beverages is my sense, or at least that's what I would prefer to see.
So then that would take this policy and almost roll it into what Commissioner Sky was doing, design for recyclability, which becomes a massive, massive policy. So our intent on this
I
was
don't think we should be afraid of
very,
them.
very focused.
I mean, it's focused. If you focus on beverage containers, you're going to affect the bottle bill eligible containers, which I think was your intent. But you'd also affect other containers that are not a part of the bottle bill. So I think having that focus is great if you just want to focus on beverage containers.
I think there's a public comment. Why don't we listen to the public comment and see what they say? Jeffrey?
Yes, I had to get my mic turned off or on. There was a comment from Gwen McKellen. They didn't have an organization listed. I agree with Commissioner Sanborn that PVC food containers should not be allowed to be sold in California. This should extend beyond simply whether they are in the bottle bill.
Thank you. I don't know who that is, but thank you for the comment. I would just say that my feeling is if it's too toxic to be in the bottle bill, it's too toxic. And I'm not afraid of big policies if they make sense. And if we've got something that shouldn't be on the market, then we should just say that and let the chips fall. And the legislature may say, we're going to handle it by doing bottle bill over here and everything else over there, which is likely the way things are going right now in the legislature. But let's leave it to the legislature to decide how to handle it. Let's just do what we think is right and let the chips fall. That's always the way I approach things.
So how would you like to change the policy? So eliminating toxic causing components and additives in food packaging?
Yeah, and then you could do a explanation as to why just for the bottle bill this is so critically important, because it does, you know, make the case for it. But there's a lot of other products that really should, they're all contaminating the entire packaging stream. In fact, that's what we raised in the other issue that Commissioner Sky, you know, wrote up on with the Plastics Pact. It's just forbidden by 2025 across the board. So it aligns with the Plastics Pact in that way.
Okay.
I'm wondering if they should be combined.
I am too.
Commissioner
I think that too. Well, maybe we look at that. Maybe that's we combine the groups and have a discussion about that, or Kobe and I can look at it and see how can we fit this in there or that in there, and whichever way, and then bring a proposal back to both of you, and we could have it'd have to be publicly noticed if there's 4 of us. Unfortunately, I still disagree with that rating, but that's what we've been given. So otherwise, we could just have a subgroup of 1 of each. So like Kobe and Jeff or Kobe and Jan meet and talk about this between the 2 of you. How do we merge these? What do you think is the best way? That might be maybe easier. A 2-way.
Commissioner Dunleavy, what do you think at this point?
It's kind of how I prefaced it. I mean, this is this was much more focused, but obviously we need to go a little higher up with it. So I think some discussions with Commissioner Sky would be good, and I'd be willing to do that.
Great. I think the less policies we have, probably the better for everybody. So if there's a way to make it work together, that would be great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's fine too. Commissioner Ward?
I just want to say that I respect the level of expertise that we have on both packaging and the bottle bill. And if you wanted to craft the text to highlight that expertise, that I welcome that. But I do also support broadening the discussion about, you know, we shouldn't have toxic packaging or packaging that interferes with the ability to recycle that package.
Well, we're just talking recycling. I'm just wondering how on earth we've gotten to the point where these very toxic materials are packaged in our food. To me, this is just mind-blowing all the way around. And part of the problem with we don't have truth in labeling on what these things are so that people can make good choices. I'm really delighted with both of these proposals, and I really appreciate Commissioner Dunleavy and Sky working together on this to see if you can bring something back that's together or separate. Either way, for the next meeting, I'll make sure the agenda is set up, so no matter what way you choose, we'll have it time and space for a good discussion on it. Sound good? All right, thank you. Very, very good work. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. Since again, we've got many commissioners that have to leave early today. Agenda item 6, which is on household hazardous waste, and I'll turn it over quickly to Commissioner Ward. You're on mute. You're still on.
Yeah, now I'm off mute, but trying to share the screen. So let's see. There, are we seeing that?
Yep.
Okay, good. So I've highlighted what we've added. This was based on a discussion from a couple months ago, and essentially the highlight of the discussion was concern about packages that had once contained hazardous waste, and particularly, say, liquid pesticides, herbicides, things that like that, specifically interfere with the recyclability of those streams. And so the discussion was that we needed to highlight what is recyclable, what isn't, what should be done with those packages after the hazardous waste is removed from them. So I've added a paragraph of context here. I'll read that. Furthermore, customers are often confused about which products are hazardous and what is proper management of household hazardous waste. Containers placed in recycling bins that contain residual amounts of hazardous products contaminate recycling streams and pose occupational hazards to people working in recovery and discard operations. Hazardous products residuals fundamentally impede recovery of post-consumer plastic materials for food-grade application. There was a broader discussion, but that I tried to capture most of it. And then we added one policy. This is, again, an already existing adopted policy, so these are just the amendments to that. And the third item we're adding there, or recommending, is update requirements for labeling and/or color container changes of all packages for products that CalRecycle and the Department of Toxic Substances Control determined should be managed as household hazardous waste. Labels on those packages should inform customers regarding how to identify when a product container is empty and proper management of empty containers after product use.
Any
And
comments?
that's it. I'd be happy to take comments and questions.
So this is based on the discussion we had about making sure we're not, putting chasing arrows and stuff on a package that's containing malathion and it ends up in the recycling stream with highly dangerous chemicals that should not be ending up in baby bottles. So, any thoughts, Commissioner Lapis?
Quick question on if you could pull that back up.
Sure.
It's actually not new, but the section on LED lamps says that they can be thrown in the trash. Do we know that for a fact?
No, you're actually right. They are not disposed of in the trash. In fact, what's happening is LEDs themselves are not toxic, but the container of the lamp sometimes has copper and other things. So thank you for catching that. That's actually right. We should not say it can be disposed of in the trash. They are more energy efficient. They're durable. The diodes are non-toxic, but what they're contained in sometimes must be handled as hazardous waste. But again, they're constantly changing in the waste stream, and what they're being packaged in. So we don't know over time if they're going to become non-toxic. But right now, the studies have shown, and DTSC has told us that they should be disposed of as hazardous waste, household hazardous waste. So thank you for catching that. But you can say the LEDs, the diodes are not hazardous. The containers can have metals and materials that do require hazardous waste disposal. But nothing that they contain is as dangerous as mercury. Thank you for catching that. Okay, anybody else on this section? I can tell you that I have heard from Paint Care, and there's discussion already about getting aerosol cans into the Paint Care program. So again, our discussions do get heard. I want to thank you all for, again, your work. So hopefully in the next year or so, we'll have that come to fruition. Any other comments on that policy?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Ted, could you put it back up for a second?
Sure.
I'm a little confused about the solar panel sentence.
Solar panels for all products larger than a laptop computer. Safer.
Oh, you scrolled past it. It's right there in the middle.
Oh,
Yeah.
solar panels. There we are.
I'm just not trying to understand what that sentence means.
Additionally, some products are just toxic and unnecessary and have safer, cheaper alternatives, making their sale unnecessary and costly. But you're right, that seems to be a hanging chad, the solar
It
panel.
does. Yeah, I'm not sure what it's there.
How did we miss that? It looks like it just got. Like
I'm sure it was a great point somewhere else in the document, but it might have gotten moved. or something.
Yeah, help me here. So are we asking for EPR programs to be established for solar panels?
I would love that. I think that's where we had started and somehow 5 got removed, the number, and
Yeah,
this
I think that's what happened.
yeah. We still don't have any program for solar panels, and they have been declassified under the mining bill to a universal waste. But I think if we've said household hazardous waste should have EPR, this is kind of a different form of household hazardous waste. It's huge and it's not your normal under the sink stuff, but that doesn't mean it's any less of a problem for the homeowner. And the same with any kind of like battery wall. So this is, I mean, do we want to call out the large green energy tech like solar panels and battery walls that need a take back program? And maybe that's something Commissioner Ward and I can flesh out and bring back. But I could say does anybody have thoughts on that? So we could just take your thoughts into consideration when we draft some language for that. And thank you for catching that. That was missing.
My only thought is that makes sense, but I'm not sure that the two halves of the sentence were meant to be together either.
Yeah, I agree. Larger than a laptop computer.
It almost seems like that the second half is from an altogether different sentence. Unless we're looking to mandate solar panels for all products, but I don't think that's the proposal.
Well, this section
No,
established EPR programs for the product categories below to reduce known fire and operational hazards. So this was another one of the product categories that should have established EPR program. So that's basically what we said, and it's solar panels for all products larger than a laptop computer. But I guess my comment is, do we want to add solar panels and battery walls?
But what does it mean that it's solar panels for all products larger than a laptop computer?
I think it was meaning if you've got little solar panels that are just used to recharge your cell phone or recharge your laptop.
Or your calculator.
Okay, so standalone solar photovoltaic systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Or residential scale photovoltaic systems might be a better way to describe that. Or
well, they're basically.
Even if you said photovoltaic systems, I think that implies you're not talking about a calculator.
All products larger than a laptop computer. Well, because there's lighting systems for your yard that have little solar panels on them, and they're getting to be bigger and bigger.
I'm not actually arguing one way or another on what the scope should be. I'm just trying to make this make sense.
All right, exactly. That's good. Well, why don't we just add the 2 products, and then Ted and I will work on wordsmithing since we're so limited on time today.
Yep.
And in that sentence below,
there.
That one, yeah. See, additionally, some products are toxic, unnecessary, marine flares, fluorescent lamps. Yeah, so I think we got all of that. Okay.
So this is first hearing on these revisions, and Heidi and I are going to wordsmith a little bit on the items in blue and come back.
I would say the one thing I would like to add to the discussion about products that are just toxic and unnecessary and have safer and cheaper alternatives, making them unnecessary, would be the single-use vaping products, because those are not necessary. We have rechargeables on the market for both cannabis and tobacco, and they're being sold as disposable just throw them in the trash. I've seen them on the websites. If you guys are okay with adding that, I think that would be helpful to specifically call it out. Since we've called out marine flares, mercury lamps. But that's a proliferating product that has a lot of batteries that are ending up in the trash and has no take back program.
Although I believe your proposal for those is to prohibit them altogether, right? Not to create a take back program.
Right, so that's why some of these are saying they have a safer, cheaper alternative,
So
and
maybe
making their sale unnecessary and costly.
maybe we can also add the disposable vapes as an example in the battery discussion in Kobe's item too.
Why would we?
Because it's an example of a disposable product, like a greeting card and a balloon that is sold with a battery.
Well, that's what we're trying to make sure we don't overlap though, right? I mean, or one policy references another when they get into gray areas.
Right.
I don't care where it is. I think this is a natural household hazardous waste, home generated thing. And these are the ones that's under the ban, where it's single use, it doesn't make any sense. It should just be banned. We could say banned or required take back, but I'll guarantee you still, they're still gonna end up in the wrong place. Some of them, even with the take back program.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap this up and move on. Commissioner Schneider?
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused over why photovoltaic systems larger than a laptop. I have decorative lights that are coming with the solar charging. My holiday lights are solar charged, and they're fairly cheap. So when they break, they're going to end up in an e-waste stream. So maybe the next time you come back, elaborate on why we're choosing something based on size.
Or maybe we just narrow it to rooftop solar panels and keep it clean for now. So that's something Commissioner Ward and I will look at.
Okay.
That was the
To me,
intent.
it's the cheap products that we don't know what to do with when they break at end of life.
Yeah, that's a whole nother category that's quite large that we're seeing a lot more of.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll work on that. Thank you, everyone. And Commissioner Segura?
Just a quick thing. If you look down on under 3 at that paragraph, not that I'm changing, but it's that first paragraph says, you know, that LED lamps are more energy efficient and durable, and the diodes themselves are not hazardous. And it says some products using LEDs are hazardous. So maybe some elaboration there, because I mean, I think that's a bit confusing.
That is confusing. Some products using LEDs. Yeah, I mean, that I wouldn't even say that. I mean, if we're talking about the lighting, the LED itself is not what's hazardous. It's what's it's in.
Yeah, and so anyway, I mean, that just to me, it's a comment. Just when folks look at it, that just seems confusing.
Totally. That's what we get for trying to draft live here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and work on that. We've got to move on to the next item. Thank you again, Commissioner Ward. Let's see, we're turning this now over to item 7, plastic waste exports data presentation and discussion. We have Jim Pouquet here from the Basel Action Network. He has presented to us before, and we were lucky enough to get him again and to have his time. He has a presentation and a PowerPoint he wanted to share with us. And again, Vice Chair Valle had invited him before he got sick. So we're sorry that we're missing him today.
Actually, the way this came about was I requested it to be on the agenda, and I'm giving a presentation first of the latest facts and figures. And after I requested it to be on the agenda, then Commissioner Valle reached out to Jim Puckett. And Jim contacted me and said, hey, I got an invitation to do this. I go, oh, okay, well, I'm already planning to give the presentation. So we're going to split the time today, and I'll start with facts and figures, and then Jim Puckett will talk about how most of plastic waste exports are actually illegal. So I would like to share my screen. I submitted this this PDF of this presentation. It's posted in the public domain. I'm going to get
Before
my.
you get going, I'm just going to say that I have to leave at 10:45, so I'm going to turn the gavel over to Commissioner Ward at that time. And I know quite a few of us have to go early today, so just be aware of that. And I would also recommend that we skip one of the meetings in April, the second one, because Rachel Maki-Wagner, the director, was going to present to us between 9 and 10 on April 6th, but everybody's just too busy. The legislature is just moving really fast this year. So that would be my proposal. I'll leave it up to you to decide and turn it over to Commissioner Ward as soon as I go.
Okay, that sounds like a good proposal. Should we all agree to that right now?
And we just meet on April 6th for the 3 hours and then skip the 20th. I think everybody's probably okay with that. Okay. And then we'll get back to 2 in May when it slows down. Thank you.
Okay, so sharing screen, pulling up presentation, crossing my fingers. Can that be seen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I need to put it into presentation mode, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I have to move this little thing off the panel so I can go do that. Okay, I'm gonna hit the highlights. Oh, do we know, is Jim on the line? Did he? Hopefully he's here. Okay, time check. It is 10:20. I'm just gonna hit this in 10 minutes. I do hope that we have people listening from cities and municipalities all over California who are still exporting plastic waste, because I want to give the message loud and clear. This is not the right thing to be doing, and it needs to come to an end. Here's the impetus for giving the presentation with the latest data from 2021 has now been published, and I wanted to show that California is still the largest plastic waste exporter to non-OECD and Mexico in the whole country. And the reason it needs to stop is shown here in this cartoon, which is actually quite sad. We're still calling it recyclable, but we're not recycling it in California or the US. We're saying, oh yeah, other countries can recycle a recyclable. No, if it's not recyclable in the US, it's waste. And NGOs across the world have made a call to action to shipping lines to stop transporting this, because they are transporting plastic pollution. That's been shown. It's very difficult. We've gotten some companies to agree to not export plastic waste. Kudos to Waste Management for being the first one to agree to do that outside of North America. But others are not following. And so we're going to try to shut this down by asking the ships to not take it anymore. And in fact, yesterday at the annual meeting in Copenhagen for Maersk, there was a large call to action to ask Maersk to stop loading plastic waste onto their ships. They claim to be a company that wants to protect the ocean, and yet they're transporting plastic waste to other countries that don't have the capability of even recycling their own waste. It's proven it gets into the ocean. The good news, I'm excited to say, is on February 11th, CMA CGM, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, made the announcement in France with the president of France on the stage at a big oceans conference, saying they would no longer export plastic waste. They would not ship it on their boats. They previously shipped 50,000 shipping containers a year because they recognize the harm that they are causing. And this is going to hit local to home, okay? There is a route from CMA CGM that would pick up plastic waste in the port of Long Beach and take it to Port Klang, Malaysia. And that shipping line is no longer going to be there. So the message to Californians and to the US is that we need to take responsibility for our own waste. Why? It causes serious harms. There's a false argument that's being floated right now. Oh, there's responsible recyclers in these other countries. Well, I can tell you, I've worked in 45 countries. I've worked all out throughout Asia, and that's a false argument, okay? Every one of those countries, including Mexico as well, has very low capability for collecting and managing their own waste. When we send them rich, subsidized plastic bales from California, the US, to those countries, to those recyclers, they're going to use those. They aren't going to bother spending money to try to collect their own waste. And we've had Turkish workers saying in the Guardian articles, please, US, stop sending your plastic waste to us because it kills the market for collection and recycle systems. If you have any empathy at all as a recycler here in California, imagine if there was some rich country across the ocean that was way richer than us and was flooding us with plastic waste. Why would we collect and recycle our own? And every day there's new bad news about the harms that can be causing. What recently has come out is a study that was done in Vietnam. I bought this paper, research paper, it cost $43. I bought it. I'm studying it in detail. I worked a lot in industrial wastewater treatment, including in Vietnam, and I am very concerned about this. And what they did study of 3 different mechanical recyclers in Vietnam, and they found microplastic pollution coming out of the mechanical recycling. So there's so many harms being caused by our plastic waste exports that it needs to end. But the bad news is California is still exporting a lot. And in fact, we're increasing. We're increasing to Indonesia. This shows you January 20 through 2021 last year. It's mostly ethylenes. I think it might be plastic films or agricultural film waste and that sort of thing. But the notion that we're decreasing to countries like Indonesia is not true. This is the official data. We're actually increasing. And yes, here's the data that's similar to what you've seen before as a state. And to be clear, this is data that for waste that originates in California, not from what goes through our ports. That might come from Arizona or something, and that's not even happening. This is actually HS, Bill of Lading codes that were originators in California. And you can see we're way disproportionate. With only 12% of the population, we account for 25% of the waste exports to non-OECD countries. But we're increasingly sending a lot more to Mexico and Central America as well. There's the chart on where it's going. And in fact, here's the bad news. Because of port constrictions and so on, and also countries in Asia saying, no, we don't want your plastic waste. We're now sending it to Latin America, Mexico, Guatemala, and these are little countries. You know, when you look at the per capita of how much plastic waste we're sending to Guatemala, it's just shocking. And it's beginning to make news. We've got the BBC reporting about garbage imperialism, and California is getting called out. There's harms. There's harms in sending it to Mexico. They're very similar. They don't have water either, right? And they also don't have strong environmental regulations. They definitely don't have industrial wastewater treatment for microplastics and things like this. So our plastic waste exports going to Mexico, there's no denying that it's causing harms. And to be clear, NGOs and the people in these countries are asking for us to stop. Here is a letter that came out that was coordinated by Gaia in December of this year of NGOs all throughout Latin America and South America, Central America, saying, stop sending your plastic waste exports to us. So in summary, we have to stop. We have to take responsibility for our own waste. It's harmful and it's unethical and it's illegal. Jim's going to talk about that. Why is it illegal? These countries have now implemented contamination limits on what can come in. Now, there is no international treaty. It's not illegal for us to ship it, but it's illegal for them when it gets there. So we're disregarding, we're disrespecting the country laws that are in Malaysia, Indonesia, all these other countries on their contamination limits by sending MRF bales there and other industrial types of scrap. The reality is when you look at the contamination limits, there is no MRF bale that meets that contamination limit. And so by putting a MRF bale on a ship and sending it to one of these countries, we're violating their import laws. So in summary, if the plastic waste isn't recyclable in the United States, we should not consider it recyclable. And it's a false narrative. It's a false argument to say it's okay to ship plastic waste to responsible recyclers in other countries because we're destroying their market to collect and manage their own waste. And with that, hopefully I will easily transition over to Jim Puckett, who can tell you more about the legalities of what's going on. Jim, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Jan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Great.
can hear you.
Okay, if you could put that on full screen, that would be awesome. I don't know if that's possible, but yeah, thank you, Jan. I'm just going to add chapter 2 to what Jan has been saying. Basically, the message is clear. Next slide, please. The Basel Convention has been ratified by 189 countries. That's a huge saturation of the globe. US is not one of those. Next, please. So I'm going to tell you about the amendments. They were adopted in 2019 to begin to address the plastic waste crisis from the Basel perspective, which works on waste trade, transboundary movement, as they call it, of hazardous and other wastes. And these amendments entered into force in 2021. So Jan and I now have data to really report on what's happened in the first year of implementation. Next, please. The intention of these amendments was really to ensure control and transparency for movements of plastic waste which are not likely to be recycled mechanically or in a proper way. So that was the intent. And there are certain categories now that are controlled which never were before. And to summarize these, we can say they're plastic waste mixtures, except for one mixture there. Contaminated plastic waste, we'll talk about that. Halogenated polymers like PVC, and also waste destined for incineration or waste to energy. They were going to control these for the first time with this new Annex 2 category Y48. Next slide, please. So the effect of these, how do you control them? The default control is what's known as prior informed consent. So that means you can't export until the receiving country agrees in a state-to-state communication that they can accept it. And there has to be assurances of environmentally sound management, and anything that doesn't have those notifications and consent is considered a criminal act, illegal traffic. But in two instances that are important, there's not prior informed consent at play, but a full ban. And that comes with the European Union's 27 countries. They have included this Annex 2 in a full ban. And then there's the United States, which, because we're not a party to the convention, it's banned for Basel parties to receive this new category of waste from a non-party like the US. There's only one exception to that at the moment, and that is Canada. So the only exports that the US can send legally of these newly controlled wastes will be to Canada, believe it or not. So next slide, please. Again, the non-parties, very glaring. The US is one of the very few in a group including East Timor, Grenada, Fiji, Haiti, San Marino, really tiny, distraught countries. And then we have the US being a non-party. Next slide. So the contamination issue, the new amendments have the language almost free from contamination and other types of waste. And that's considered very strong legal language, kind of signifying a de minimis, an amount that has no significance. And so the convention never nailed it down what that means. So they've left it up to the parties on a national basis to interpret that legal language. Next slide. And BAN has kept track of who has said what. And we can back all these up with sources if you'd like to see that. But this is what we've found so far. These are the countries that have put something out there. And you have 0 to basically 5%. Other plastics is the norm. So almost everything is less than 5% for sure, and sometimes much less than that, which is going to be considered a level which won't be controlled. Next slide, please. And as Jan noted from the Bale rate study, next slide, please, even something that's considered a recyclable, next slide, like PET, has about 14.1% of what is considered contamination. And just looking at dirt and debris, there's 2.5%. That sends it past all of those receiving countries' norms and what they've said in their policy. So it's very unlikely that we have clean, according to the convention, waste streams that are being exported. Next slide, please. So to give you a quick summary of where we're at, I'll go through this quickly because the real bottom line is that, yeah, the US can export green, means free trade basically, but only to Canada and only to some tiny little countries, like I mentioned, Grenada, East Timor, Haiti. But all the other Basel parties, all 188 of the other parties, we're not allowed to export these newly controlled wastes to them. And even at the OECD level, this is what's not commonly known, countries like Mexico are also not allowed to receive this because the US challenged the OECD's automatic adoption of the Basel Amendments. And so the OECD didn't adopt them. And so Basel's the only instrument for legal trade. And so even countries like Mexico, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, which are OECD countries, and Turkey, are not allowed to receive wastes that are controlled from the United States. Next slide, please. So again, the massive amount of, we're not seeing the whole slide here, unfortunately, but basically all the countries, I've listed a few of them, but it's all of the Basel parties except for Canada are in that red category, illegal. Next slide, please. So what's actually happening? As you can see, this is a flow chart of what happened in 2021. And if you subtract Canada, because that is legal, everything else below it is illegal. And that's 369,994, 299 kilograms, which unless you believe those are all really clean and single polymer and not PVC, those are illegal. Almost everything that's flying offshore, we believe, is illegal. And we can prove that some of it absolutely is. And that's the next slide, please. So PVC is absolutely going to be considered an organohalogen polymer. So it's controlled under new Annex 2 Y48. And this is how much PVC was going offshore. The leading country was Malaysia. Mexico also is not able to legally receive that. Again, only Canada, fourth on the list, is able to receive that from the US legally. A lot of this PVC is coming out of California. Next slide,
most
please.
of it. Most of it. I have a slide. The majority, more than half of that PVC is coming from California HS codes. Again, not just through the ports, but actually from California origination.
Correct. Next slide, please.
And I'm going to have to go, but doesn't this underscore the need for the all packaging policy to not have PVC? It kind of underscore.
I actually think that this must be PVC. I don't think a MRF is exporting PVC bales. I think this must be coming from window manufacturers or PVC pipe or industrial, which we haven't gotten to, right? Which we haven't talked much about. But I think it's from scrap from some sort of PVC manufacturer.
Just have a couple more slides.
In charge.
So clearly California tops the list, as Jan made the case. Next slide, please. So in summary, California's laws, policies, and practices aid and abet criminal trafficking and waste. Now, you're not gonna be able to arrest somebody in California for it because we're not a Basel party, but you're putting your trade partners at criminal risk. Next slide, please. So the Commerce Clause in the US Constitution, as we've discussed before, doesn't allow states to limit foreign trade per se. But there are some things we can do. I just want to go through these real quickly. We can continue to call for full ratification of the Basel Convention by the federal government. I know we've done that. We can adopt a policy of not allowing exports that will violate the laws of importing countries. I think that'll pass muster in the courts. Next slide. We can demand full transparency, public disclosure of all municipalities and waste haulers in all the waste hauling contracts. We can verify transparency by mandating consent to use GPS tracking. We can stop collecting plastics for recycling when there's not a domestic market, and we can legislate strict penalties for violators. Next slide. Thank you so much. Jan and I can field any questions if you have the time to do that.
Thank you. Questions? Put an asterisk in the chat. I did have a question about the transparency. My understanding is that it's fairly difficult to get information about where materials go once they exit a port. Do you have any insight as to how municipalities might ask for that information or even demand it?
Well, on the bills of lading, which the government eventually gets, and the shipping lines have immediately, the importer is listed, and you can actually see where it goes. We've been putting GPS trackers and working with that technology to try to verify things, but those are the primary ways to find out exactly what facility is receiving it. If it were actually exported legally and in accordance with the Basel norms of, having the consent notification go through the hands of the government, then all of that information has to be there. For these things to be acceptable under Basel, they have to be proof of environmentally sound management. You can't have that proof without knowing who the receiving facility is. So I guess to answer your question, we could have a mechanism where it's mandated that the haulers provide that information voluntarily, that they will tell you where it ends up. And if they don't know, that's a big warning sign right there.
Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, let me turn my volume up. Jim, the domestic capacity question, if we were to process material, say PET bottles, into flake or pellets, are those subject to limitations on export, or is it the raw material, the bottle?
If they're not clean and they're not single polymer, they will be under the control of the Basel rules I just mentioned. That's irrespective of whether the facility is environmentally sound. So that would also have to be looked at. But from a trade perspective, if you cleaned it up to the point where there was, minimal contamination and it was single polymer except for the mix of PE, PP, and PET, which is allowed, and it wasn't an organohalogen like PVC, and it was going to mechanical recycling, then that would be considered non-controlled under Basel. Be okay to export.
Yeah, there's discussions around paper, for example, exporting paper pulp is a way to supply international markets without shipping the raw material, without shipping the cardboard or mixed paper bales with the contaminants. So it sounds like if you make a grade of recycled PET pellet that meets market conditions, and that includes probably the contamination levels. So that would help to drive our domestic market development. So.
Yeah, I think more and more because of these new rules, and the Basel Convention could be ratified by the U.S. finally, but even if not, these rules are having an effect, as I just mentioned, that it is criminal trafficking once it gets on the high seas. So I think what's more and more going to happen is the U.S. and all the other countries generating waste are going to handle it domestically. And that means recycling it here, and we will be able to deal with our own recycling issues, and that will come to bear. But the paper issue you mentioned, a bit of a different subject, but they're beginning to discover that the paper pulp that's going is contaminated with plastic. This is a huge amounts of it, sometimes 10 to 15% of what goes as paper pulp is full of plastic, and all that plastic is getting dumped alongside the paper mills in places like Indonesia, creating a huge problem. And we're very fearful that it's going to be set aflame as so much of the waste in the developing world is eventually burned. So this is another issue that's going to be coming more and more to the fore.
Paper pulp or paper bales?
Paper bales, sorry.
Yeah.
They have, yeah.
I think when we can process
going to the pulp mills in Indonesia is where, this is what's happening.
Right. Yeah. Again, that's the difference between shipping bales and shipping pulp.
Correct.
The pulp is presumably can be introduced into
clean. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Are virgin plastic limited by the Basel, or is it only?
No, it's waste. So things are going to a recycling operation or disposal operation.
Okay.
not virgin.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the United Nations initiative on on plastic production and how that
Correct.
fits
Yeah,
with
that's a
this
different
discussion.
process, but there is going to be a treaty coming down on the whole life cycle of plastics, and Basel will integrate with that.
Can you give us more information about that timing process?
You know, it's on a slower track. There's a lot of impetus behind it. However, a lot of people working on it, a lot of NGOs, a lot of countries are excited about it. It's just had to give you an idea, they've just decided to do it. The last meeting took place a few weeks ago. So it is going to be a treaty. It is going to look at the whole life cycle. So when you say the whole life cycle, we're talking about hopefully bans on single-use plastics, things like that will be mandated in it. But they just agreed to do that. So now they're going to start the negotiations. I would expect they would take 3 years.
But say, and I've been reading about, say, spills of containers full of nurdles, which are a pre-production level of plastics, but also equally of concern when released in the ocean. I assume that treaty would address those concerns.
Well, there'll be a call for it, but you can bet the IMO has a whole slew of treaties, the International Maritime Organization, about ship trafficking and safety and of that, and they're going to probably claim competency over that issue. There's a lot of treaties already about dumping at sea and incidental waste coming from ships. So they'll probably say that's our job. But you're right, the UNEA treaty, the process of the big treaty could push the IMO to do that. And as they could push the Basel Convention to be more strict, for example, on trade. But they all have their competencies and their little fiefdoms, so they'll probably separate it still.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Lapis.
Hey, Jim, thanks for doing another presentation. Always nice to see you. Can you explain again? I think I was following along as you were saying it, and then it doesn't make sense in my head anymore, about the countries that what is it, the OECD countries that adopted the amendment and we challenged it. And so what is the background there, and what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a little crazy nuance, but very important. The US thought they were going to be the bad boys. They didn't like these amendments, and they were like the only country, but they're not a party. So they had Argentina at the convention pushing their point of view, as it turned out. Anyway, of course, they lost, and kind of in a spiteful way, they went to the OECD, which has a treaty of its own, which is kind of under the Basel Convention as an Article 11 agreement. You're allowed to have other agreements as long as they're consistent with the Basel Convention. Normally, the OECD agreement adopts automatically the Basel amendments, but the US objected. And so they had a big to and fro about it, and the US just dug in their heels and said, we object, we don't like this new Y48 listing. And so the OECD had to pull it out of their treaty. So anybody that wants to trade with the US in this new category, Y48, has to do it through Basel. And of course, the US is not part of Basel. So what it means in effect is, unless there's another Article 11 agreement to include the US, then the US is left out of the game, and they would be considered a party you couldn't trade with. So rapidly, the US went back home and signed such an agreement with Canada. So they created a bilateral agreement. We think it was an illegal agreement because it's completely less environmentally sound than Basel. But they basically, with Canada, said, we're going to have a free trade in this new category. We're not going to adopt the Basel Amendment, basically, between the two countries. So that is the only avenue now where the US can legally export these newly controlled wastes, is to Canada. They can't do it to Mexico or any of the other Latin American countries, which is where Jan has noted, we've noted things are starting to go more and more. So even Mexico is off limits, Turkey is off limits, all the OECD except for Canada.
That makes more sense. Let's see if I remember it in 15 minutes. I think it made sense the first time you said it.
Yeah.
What about, Jim, what about the MCA? Does that factor in here at all?
The what?
The
Oh,
MCA,
the three
the
country
NAFTA.
agreement.
Yeah.
No, it's subservient to Basel. If they did want to have a waste trade agreement, one between Mexico and US, it's very old, but it's only for hazardous waste. So again, it's not useful for the US to use that to send plastics to Mexico. And there is no real waste trade agreement within the MCA. If they created one, that would be subservient to Basel. It would be an Article 11 agreement. And you can look at Article 11. It basically says you can have agreements that even include non-parties, but they have to be as environmentally sound and equivalent level of control as the Basel Convention.
So then how does the Canadian agreement meet that definition?
It's illegal. And we squawked about it. We had the Center for Environmental Law put out a notice and report about it being illegal as well, but Canada and the US just rushed it through and said, don't worry, it's legal, we're happy with it. And of course, there's no big tribunal at Basel which will tell countries they messed up. All we can do is shame them and remind them that what they've agreed is not legally correct. But that is the case between Canada and the US. They hastily threw together something, they signed it, and it just basically said, we're going to ignore the new amendments between these two countries. We asked if they're planning to do a similar one with Mexico. They said no. But it's a little frightening. International law is governed by the integrity of states upholding it.
Thanks, that's super helpful.
Thank you,
Any more
Jim.
questions?
Jim, Jan, do you have anything further on this item?
Well, we
No,
hope by
thanks.
next year, by next year when we report to you, we're going to show great progress, because we're going to be going to the Basel Convention in the next few months and saying, hey, not only is the US out of line, but we've got to have more diligent enforcement from the receiving countries that are Basel parties. And we're going to be doing more and more reporting to these countries saying, okay, there's some shipments coming your way. We expect you to open these containers up and really scrutinize them. So I think we'll start to see slowly but surely more and more diligent enforcement.
Jeff Donlevy.
Yes, thank you, Jim and Jan. Great information. Regarding the flow of material down to Mexico, there is definitely an increase of curbside PET that cannot be processed in California. Who's doing the enforcement on that? Who's checking it?
Nobody that I know of.
Stop?
No, there's no enforcement.
I mean, because major brands have invested millions of dollars in reclamation facilities down there.
Why is it being exported, Jeff? Why isn't it being used by plastic recyclers here? We have 6 big ones that do PET food grade. Why aren't those bales? We're hearing the beverage industry and everyone's screaming, oh, there's not enough PET, there's not enough PET. So why is it getting exported to Mexico?
Yeah, the California facilities are primarily set to handle the A-grade material coming out of redemption centers. There's one facility down in Southern California, RPET, that can handle the curbside material, but they can't handle all of it with the contamination. So there's not enough capacity in California.
So we're sending contaminated bales to Mexico, and then the contamination ends up there, et cetera. And we're keeping the clean deposit grade bales in California to recycle?
Correct. So just a clarification question. If the PET bales are mixed with bottles and thermoforms, would that qualify as the same polymer type that would still be eligible to be exported?
No. They've
Why
got to
not?
be
They're still
much
PET.
more. Oh, you mean PET thermal? Okay. Those questions didn't arise, but if it's all PET, I would say, and it was clean, then it would probably pass muster.
But the bottle
But
bale,
the
the contamination we showed, even if you put the PET thermoforms with the PET bottles, you're still way over 5% contamination in all of the MRF generated bales.
Yeah, and when they went to scrutinize, I mean, if it was really two Basel parties, they would scrutinize, you know, what are the residues coming out of these facilities? And if the residues are that some of those things couldn't be recycled, then that would be considered contamination, and that would be making it non-environmentally sound. Unfortunately, the U.S. is not a party, so you're not going to get that kind of scrutiny unless Mexico does it. And yeah, we will be pressing Mexico to do that sort of thing, diligent enforcement of what they've agreed.
Yeah, I think that's what we saw. Oh, excuse me. And I think that's what we saw with Patty Moore from PRCC. They did a presentation on the PET bales. They just did another presentation yesterday talking about the contamination in the curbside bales with facilities with optical sorting equipment and things like that. Just kind of, it kicks out a lot more than just that PET polymer.
So in summary, I just wanted to say, I think it's clear the evidence shows the way the world's going, exporting your plastic waste is not responsible. In most cases, it's probably not legal, and it's a practice we should end. Just like other practices over the course of history, we all realized we shouldn't use child labor, you know, all the other things that we've realized. And so for every municipality and city in California that's still got plastics 3 through 7 on their list or accepting all these things that don't have a plastic processor in California or the US, but you know, it's hard to ship to Alabama, right? That can handle this, then basically you're accepting waste that will either go to the landfill or you're planning to export it. And that's just not acceptable. The writing's on the wall, the big shipping companies aren't taking it. It's getting tighter, there's public media attention, and the right answer is just to stop exporting plastic waste.
Thank you so much for this discussion. This really highlights the challenges of that this commission is set to try to address, everything from contamination to exports to building the California markets for these materials. But again, I reiterate, this is a production issue. This is an issue where these products are pushed onto the market, and then we as discard managers do the best we can to try to recover those materials. And that challenge is increasingly hard with the contamination, introduction of contaminants that we're seeing. And so it's the public confusion that leads to the contamination, that leads to all of the bad choices that we've made that we need to readdress. So thanks so much. Anything else to be said on this issue? Sarah.
Yeah,
I'm
actually,
sorry.
I just, that's okay. You know, I was just wondering then if it's worth considering another policy recommendation that's just basically aimed at what's going on in California and trying that as another avenue to stop this, at least from this state. I know that it's illegal, but as Jim mentioned, you know, international law is pretty complicated and much harder to enforce even than ours. So just something to think out of all this. And I understand your point, Ted, that it's a production issue, but I also think it's something that if we can just highlight even that much more or put any more focus on from our commission, as we are literally asking people to recycle and trying to, as CalRecycle is rolling out their educational program of what more you can put in there, that is it worth looking at another more focused policies on California.
Would you like to take a crack at maybe updating the policy proposal we had on the Basel Convention? See if there's, maybe work with Commissioner Dell at looking at if there's anything we can add to that, because the dynamics are changing. And I think it's, for instance, entirely appropriate that we make some sort of comment about this upcoming UN study about the whole life cycle of plastics, because we're part of, clearly we're part of the problem, and we should be part of the discussion about changing the poor decisions we've made in the past and moving towards better.
That's great. Can I get a copy of that slide or the slides that you had, especially the ones that had some ideas on what to do or what we might be able to do?
All of those
Yeah,
are in the
Heidi
commission
has
folder.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Take care, you all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right,
Bye-bye.
moving on to the next agenda item, which actually, at this point, how do you all feel about like a quick 5-minute break? All right, good for that. So we'll meet back here at 11:05. All right, taking a 5-minute break. See you back at 11:05.
Thanks, Ted.
So Sarah, thank you so much for your work the last couple of weeks. Wondering if you want to have first reading on either of the proposals we have in the folder?
Do we have time? Sure.
I think it's a higher priority than anything else, and rather than run through the two-person committees and hear about something we don't have to discuss, I thought we should discuss what we do have.
Sure.
So if you're willing, let's do one of those as soon as we all reconvene. So I'll wait until if you either put your screen on or take your mic off, let me know you're back one way or another. Appreciate it. Okay. Seeing that we're back to 11:05, I'm going to reconvene. And while we do have the general item of policy discussions in July 22 report contents and format, that's general enough that we can bring forward a discussion with a couple of policies that Commissioner Toyota has drafted up. Which one would you like to take first?
I think maybe the overall monitoring and science one, because I think that has a lot to do with the discussions that we've talked about today. And I also certainly want to thank Commissioner Kapkoff as well. He was definitely a big help with the compost policy as well.
So that's the not the compost and plastics, the circular economy one?
Yeah.
Okay. There we are. And go ahead and lead the discussion.
Okay, this came out of looking at compost and microplastics and all of that. And one of the things that I ran into constantly was that, well, we don't have this information or we don't have that information. And it really came down to, I mean, we don't even have standardized methods for monitoring in certain constituents and a lot of the things that we know are becoming emerging problems. And this kind of went out into even as Jan was talking about, having those chemicals in our food plastics. And so when I looked at our compost, or when I was thinking about the compost and how to monitor in that for the plastics and how to keep chemicals out of our food grade plastics, it really brought up a larger problem of how do we keep track of all of this, and how are we going to bridge that gap between what these things that we hear are happening to how are we really going to look for new things that we don't even know yet as these chemicals and process become more complicated and new things are introduced into our recycled materials. And in the end, the only way I could really put it together into my head was to kind of focus it on a circular economy, and that in a circular economy, you have to have this monitoring system, or the whole system is vulnerable to these contaminants and these emerging problems. So what this proposal is about, it's about filling that gap of monitoring and the science needed to understand the new chemicals that are coming into a circular economy, making sure they're safe, and if there are issues, the science involved with how do we manage them after that? How do we do this on a broad scale and not a single chemical or problem one at a time? So the other part of that is that when we're looking at doing all this under the Cal EPA umbrella, there's all 5 departments. OEA has their part to play in this. DTSC has their part to play in this. There's a lot of different moving parts. And this asks for funding to fund that monitoring, science, and everything that can help inform the decisions as we move into this circular economy. But it also asks that under the Cal EPA umbrella that these agencies come together and work a little more, or just find a way to optimize what all of them are doing so that they're working together, so that if something is identified, it moves through the systems of all 3 of the, or all 5 of the departments a little easier. And since we are going to fund it, I thought it was really only fair to ask that they optimize first before being funded. So what this, to bridge that gap and to keep the vulnerabilities of a circular economy, you know, to a minimum level, we need to fund the science and monitoring. It has to be the backbone of a circular economy, or it's just going to be too vulnerable. So under the proposal, I've asked one that 5 departments under Cal EPA come together and basically optimize what they're trying to do. I'm pretty broad here. It's not super clearly written because I don't, to me, when we're in stormwater talking about pesticides, once we get to, well, what is Department of Pesticide, the Office of Pesticide Safety, or I can't think of what it's called right now, but it's a black box at that point. So I couldn't be too specific between what they needed to do, but I wanted to get the point across that really they need to work together. There are lists for water, there are lists for toxins. That needs to come together and be optimized first. And then we can scroll down a little bit. And then basically everyone, all producers, if you sell something into or in California, you have to become part of this system as well. It's a system of, it's just going to be, it should just be part of doing business here, because it's not a matter of, at this point, identifying whether you're an issue or your product is an issue. It's just making sure that the system is safe and monitored and that the science is happening that needs to be done. And so anyone, basically I put down that all producers would have to pay into it. I also said that Cal Recycle should have a report that says where the money's going and what's being funded and what staff positions were needed in any of the Cal EPA departments, because anyone who's paying money towards something should know where it's going. That should always be public information. And it has to fund monitoring and peer-reviewed science, neutral organizations, schools, universities, so that these studies can get done and be funded on a timely manner. Because right now there's no, that's just left to, here's a problem, let's start looking at it, versus here's proactive funding to keep a watch on what's going out there and then focus on things that we see are becoming an issue. And then the last one, I think there's one more. I kind of have control over this, but not really. There, no. Ted, are you moving this? Yeah, there, right there. And then I did add in that producers could raise those fees to products that are shown through all the science and monitoring to be disruptors or have contamination that will require more issues. So that was my goal. It was really to get ahead of what we're constantly behind on, trying to figure out if this is a problem and how do we handle it, because none of that is funded, and that was the original intent of this proposal.
Okay, thank you so much. Opening to questions. Well, I have one, which is, so as I understand your proposal, essentially anything sold in California would be subject to this fee. So if I'm, say, importing oranges with no packaging, I still have to pay into this fee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it doesn't have any carve-outs for anything. I mean, I imagine that small companies or something would eventually be carved out in something like this, but even if you're not, it's not just about the packaging. I mean, if your oranges have some kind of pesticide levels on them that we weren't aware of, then we have to be watching for that.
Okay. And the other thing, and this is a more question for somebody who's more familiar with it, perhaps Commissioner Lapis, but I'm wondering how this proposal relates to green chemistry and its history trying and efforts to move through the legislature that have not been successful.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So green chemistry is a bill that passed 16, 17 years ago at this point, and DTSC does have authority. It's called the Safer Consumer Products Program. it hasn't been the most successful program in my opinion, but it does exist.
And does this proposal seem compatible with that? Is there overlap? Is there reason to believe this might be more successful or can be made so?
There does seem to be a lot of overlap. One thing that I like about this proposal is that it's a little more cross-agency as opposed to just being limited to DTSC. There's a lot of overlap.
I think that intent with the cross-agency is to bring things like, it would be great if things like that would if DTSC and green chemistry would not, could at least be, I guess, collaborated on more with the other agencies is the best way to put it. Instead of, I feel like if you're going to talk about green chemistry with a lot of the EPA agencies, then you have to only talk to them. And if you can't get a hold of them, that's not going to cross over into green chemistry for, say, the water boards.
And I again, I am opening to questions, but I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So and Sarah, I know you have a lot of experience with respect to stormwater, and I'm wondering how your thoughts on that fed into this.
Sure. Pesticides are always a problem in stormwater, and true source control or source control in stormwater is very hard as well. I mean, it's like producer responsibility in the waste sector. It's an uphill battle. But in my experience in stormwater has often been when we're talking about pesticides that really the only way to deal with those is at the source. But then we run into the Department of Pesticide. I can't think of what it's called. I don't have it up, but it's a department that does that. And again, this is just my experience, and nobody from any of the departments are here to talk about how they interact, but it's like hitting a black box. Once we talk about, okay, what can municipalities do about pesticides and stormwater? It's all, well, we need to educate, we need to do this. I'm like, why us? I mean, this is a, you can tell these are pesticides that have actual sources. You know the companies that are producing these, and yet everything falls to municipalities, which kind of lays a shield against the producers. And that's not helping our water quality get any better. So to do that, we need to, in my opinion, work a little better, the water boards and say the Department of Pesticides and again, that's my opinion, but I feel like if they worked a little more together, then that might help in the context of this proposal, optimize what we're trying to do. I don't just want to throw money on a system that can work better. So really the idea is how can they all come together and say, this is what we do, these are the issues that we know of, how do we share this information, make it something that we're all kind of moving toward the same, working together toward the same goals rather than working on our specific water, pesticides, toxics, cancer causing, all of that, and bring it into a way that it works better is what I'm trying to get at. And then add funding.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing to consider this.
Sure.
So it seems to me that if you're shipping organic produce, that they're really, and it's not packaged, there shouldn't be, I don't see a category of concern for those, and there should be some tangible advantage of doing the right thing from the outset. So it seems to me that non-packaged organic produce and livestock should be exempt from that general need to pay into the system.
You know what, I'm okay with that, and I would totally accept that. I do want to say that the overall idea of this is that we don't know what's coming. And so monitoring for all of that is something that if you're selling into the system and you want to make it a circular economy, you are part of monitoring that system. Whether or not at this point it seems like your products are an issue. But I see your point. I mean, because I added that part on the end about CalRecycle can raise the funds if your products are known to become problematic or packaging, and that would create that incentive to do something about it. Because in this case, it really doesn't. It just affects the fact that if we're going to move to this circular economy, we've got to monitor it because it's so vulnerable without it.
Okay, so here's the first hearing on this policy. Any additional questions, comments, concerns, suggested edits? Thank you so much, Commissioner Toyota, for bringing this forward. I think that concludes this first hearing of this one. And shall we move on to the next one?
Sure.
Which is the compost and plastics, correct?
Yes. This one's much more focused on, obviously, on one possible, well, problematic.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. With SB 1383, obviously, a lot or more organics, millions of tons are moving out onto farmlands, environments. Ours will be in our parks. And we know that there's going to be some level of contamination. And on top of that, SB 1383 allows plastic bags to be part of the collection stream. As long as the processor sends an annual letter saying they can take the plastics out. But this is concerning, especially with microplastics being such a major issue right now. And so when I looked into what are we monitoring for specifically, that's pretty well laid out in Title 14. And when compost is monitored, it's monitored for plastic pieces that are 5 millimeters or larger, 4 millimeters or larger. And microplastics are defined as 5 millimeters and lower. And then on top of that, there's no commercially usable standardized method to monitor in a lab for microplastics. So there's not really even a standardized method to say this is how you would look for it. I mean, we're pretty far behind on this, on millions of tons moving out into the environment and not testing, and not really even be able to have a clear way of testing whether there are microplastics in this stream. And so that's where this came about, so that the policy recommendations are that we need to have a standardized method for finding, for testing for microplastics. It might be better if we go down so I can, yeah.
Is that good?
We need to adopt the standards and accredit the laboratories. First, I mean, like as I said, there's really not even a good way or standardized way to do it. So first we need to do that. And then update the physical contamination list to test for microplastics so that we're looking for this. And then producers that sell into the state and that are utilizing plastic packaging and food items would become they would pay for it ultimately. And then what's important here is that we want to look for it, see if it's an issue, and then try to come up with ways to deal with it if it is an issue proactively. This is, in both of these two, actually, proposals, I did write down that 1383 was really, was paid for primarily by ratepayers, and that if we're going to keep doing these things, we really can't keep putting it on the ratepayers. And that's why the producer organizations are in both of these set to pay the costs of what to do with this. This is a lot like the other one. It's just focused on one specific issue at this point. And the idea behind it is to make sure that we're ahead of the problem if there is one, that we know about it. And I think Commissioner Kalpikoff also had some comments on this one as well.
Okay, Commissioner Kalpikoff.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Toyota. She did the heavy lift writing this policy, and she did a great job. One of the conversations that we've had, her and I, over the last maybe 30, 40 days on this policy is what happens if, what's the trigger for microplastics in compost, right? And we know that I think the issue comes where 1383 allows for plastic in feedstock, right? And it's specifically in the regs, which when you're on the streets with the municipality and you're discussing their model ordinance, their model franchise, and it has compostable plastics as an allowable item, and your facility doesn't accept those plastics because you're a organic certified compost facility, and that's a feedstock that's not allowed, and it becomes a challenge. And so how do we measure if any, as we mentioned, there are these microplastics getting in there, and if it's required to be put back onto each municipality's you know, on the procurement part of their parks and walkways and the residential neighborhoods, it's a challenge to look at that. So my concern is, my concern is, are there microplastics going in there? And what happens to the facilities? What happens, is this, I don't want to make a barrier and to creating and adding compost facilities throughout California. We know that the capacity is not there. We know that there's we need additional facilities, and my concern with this is how do we not make this a barrier to entry into the market? And what happens when there are microplastics that are found in compost facilities? Does that trigger that whole batch of compost going to a landfill then? Or what happens? And so those are Sarah and I talk back and forth on how this is just hopefully a research project more so than a policy that puts more burden on the infrastructure. So those are my comments, and I would love comments back from anybody on the group today that has ideas or suggestions.
Looks like Commissioner Sky, actually Lapis and then Sky.
Two quick things that popped into my head. One is I was also thinking about the, Joe, what you mentioned about what do we do with this data? I think it would be great if we had a feedback loop that if we were finding microplastics, we might change whether or not plastic bags are allowed under 1383. I don't know how the rest of the group feels, but that was always a major concern I had as well when those regulations are being developed. So maybe that could be kind of the feedback loop of the research project. Research project determines whether or not we should relook at whether plastic bags make sense in 1383. And then my second thought is, as we're doing any of this research, I think it's going to be very important to compare microplastics to background levels. Because we've seen, I mean, as I'm sure most of you have seen, studies coming out every other week about the amount of microplastics everywhere, right? I mean, they're finding it in literally the highest place on Earth, they found it on Everest, and they found it in the lowest place on Earth on the Mariana Trench. And so saying it's in compost isn't necessarily making a statement about it relative to background conditions. So I just want to make sure if we do go down the road of any of this research, it includes some kind of evaluation of background levels. And also, sorry, no, I said two things. I had a third thing as well. I appreciate the concept that the producer should be paying for all this. I think that might be adding an unnecessary potential poison pill to this proposal, because any fees are 2/3 votes, and it just becomes a whole other complicated thing that I'm not sure needs to be in here. The idea is we think CalRecycle should fund some research, which they do regularly, into this area, and then if it shows that their policies are increasing the microplastics in compost, they should adjust their policies. At least that's kind of the way I interpreted it.
Commissioner Sky. I'm sorry. Looks like Sarah had something to say about that.
Oh yeah, no, I just want to say I think that's fine. I mean, if we put CalRecycle to do that, if that would be a poison pill to this, it might be worth looking into, because if they do, then that's just more of the groundwork laid to say, okay, if we need to go to a next step, here's at least some data, and now we can, if something more needs to be done, take a look at that later.
Mr. Sky.
I really appreciate this proposal, and I noticed there's a lot of focus on compost, and I think there's a couple of references to mulch. The other part of this that is concerning to me is land application, and I expect that there's going to be growing volumes of organic material managed through land application. If you have no concern, I'd love to see that addressed throughout the document wherever it makes sense to do that.
Okay. Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, I guess there's a presumption here that plastics would end up in compost because of plastic bags that were used to collect the material. And I think it would be probably useful to verify that. The sample material that was composted without being collected in plastic bags, and that might help with Commissioner Lappa's suggestion about trying to get a handle on background levels. The other thought along that line is the whole bioplastics, PLA, other bags. I've begun to read a lot of suggestions that a best practice would be if you're packaging organic material or material that would end up in organic stream, focus on the bioplastics. This might be a way to help introduce that market. I'm not sure where all these plastic bags are going to come from that people are going to use to set out their compost, but I think we ought to at least broach the idea that there are alternatives to petroleum-based plastic. I know there are, if you're gonna break the bag and remove it, and the bag is causing the microplastic contamination, then eliminate the petroleum-based bag, and you don't have to worry about composting the bioplastic, which is, a whole other issue. But so, those are my suggestions. Try to get a handle on the background. Is it really a result of the collection practice, or is there something else that's contributing to it? And then address the use of bio-based bags as an alternative to petroleum bags.
Excellent. Commissioner Madrano.
Yeah, to Commissioner Sky's point on land application, I suggest adding digestate AD facilities, or just digestate to that list of items or potential products that could be land applied. That's one point. Second point is on additional products that could be contaminants. I would suggest to also add food packaging. I see that as a major contaminant also to this process. And then on number 4, alternatively, I would suggest that we make it a point there to add that perhaps these products, rather than requiring a producer responsibility organization, maybe just should not be sold in California in the food industry, or something to that effect. So just, that's all.
Okay, Commissioner Schneider.
Thank you. I should know the answer to this, but where do street sweepings, storm drain, and litter catch basin materials go? They're not, are they added into composting operations? Because that's a big source of plastics and microplastics, as well as heavy metals.
They're usually landfilled. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I'm just going to say the same thing. No, they wouldn't end up in a composter.
That's good to know, but I'm not sure that that is true everywhere, especially for cities that might have huge leaf falls. I've always wondered what happens to all that leaf fall material when it's picked up by a street sweeper. Maybe clarify that. Maybe we need to say, do not add them in, even if it is full of lovely dead leaves.
I have a quick comment. Yeah, and that was my concern, Commissioner Snyder. Well, there are leaf programs in the valley, at least, and most cities have them. And there are, it's picked up on the street, on the curb, and delivered to compost facilities normally. And so I think Nick had a pretty good comment on the levels, right, at this research. What are, and I don't even know what the acceptable levels are, if any, but I believe they're there now, and I think that that's a standard or something we should look at. There's acceptable, not acceptable, but there are currently microplastics in the waste stream. What does adding plastics to feedstock? How does that increase it, if any? I think that's one of my concerns is that we may have it in there already, and if there's no research on what's currently there, what levels are, what are the levels that raise a red flag?
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm just trying to add text here to remind Commissioner Toyota about the levels of conversation. So just trying to capture stuff. Looks like Commissioner Lapis has something else to say.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there would be a consensus among this group to recommend that CalRecycle change the 1383 regulations to prohibit the use of non-compostable bags. And I realize that wasn't necessarily agendized, but it's part of this agenda item. But it might be worthwhile as a standalone recommendation if there is a consensus. Okay, see a couple of thumbs up.
I tend to agree, but that's largely because my questions about whether or not those materials actually can be composted or 100% removed. And so that's guesswork based on systems I'm not familiar with. But it is in the law, and recognize the inclusion in the law creates it kind of an awkward situation for a lot of local governments, as those are viewed as critical to lining the food waste containers, and yet they have to be removed in additional cost.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, I'm talking about the traditional plastic bags that CalRecycle allows, and it's created a little bit of a situation where I think, Joe, the point you're making is that now jurisdictions are seeing that as a compliance option and are telling their processor that they want that, even though the processor definitely does not want plastic bags in their material.
I would be very open to considering that as a policy at a future meeting. Or do you think that it should be folded in here?
No, maybe I'll work on it as a separate policy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought the processor had to agree on an annual basis. So,
Commissioner Kalpakoff, do you have anything to say on that idea?
Well, I have a comment on the contamination. So Commissioner Toyota and I researched and I pulled some reports from my facility just to look at what they're measuring. We get every batch tested by a lab. We have to send a sample up, and as of right now, with our organic certification, they do measure anything larger than 5 millimeters. 5 millimeters and larger, right? So, and it's my concern is we can pull out contaminants. We have most facilities have some sort of a processing line as it goes through to pull out contaminants. And then there's the back end as well with screens and technology now that are coming out with that you can remove large debris and with different size decks and screens. Once it gets in the waste stream, it's a challenge to get it out, especially something smaller than 4 or less millimeters. So I support. I've always supported on this commission that we shouldn't allow plastic bags in the feedstock. We've had this conversation a few times regarding the blue cart and what we've accepted there for years, and it's created a huge issue, right? We're dealing with it today, the last 30 months on this, or 25 months on this commission, and what levels of contamination we're seeing in there. I just don't want to see that happen with this organics waste stream as well. So those are, yeah, I would support that definitely, Nick.
Okay, so if there aren't any other comments on this, I'll consider this first reading of this proposal. We'll look to Commissioners Toyota and Kalpakoff to refine it based on this discussion, and we'll be looking to Commissioner Lapis for future proposal regarding plastic bags and the organics waste stream. Further discussion on this item before we close it out? Okay, not seeing any. We do just have a little over 15 minutes left in the meeting, and we'll try to move along the remaining items at a decent clip. So looking at those, what do we got? Our next item is essentially a review with the two-person committees, and I really appreciate the two proposals from Commissioner Toyota, as I thought they were higher priority. We had a report out from the two-person committees at the last meeting. I think instead, rather than doing a one-by-one, we'll just see if there's any two-person committee that wants to report any additional progress. Not seeing any. Okay, we'll continue moving along the agenda then. We'll consider that item done. A discussion with CalRecycle on education and outreach. Do we have somebody from CalRecycle ready to address that topic?
Good morning, Ted.
Hi, Zoe.
I can give a really brief update today because I know we're tight on time. If anyone had tuned into yesterday's CalRecycle monthly public meeting, Maria West, our Director of Public Affairs, did a little bit of show and tell with some of the new information on the website, and I'll share some of that quickly now. So since my last update, there's been a couple of new additions to the iRecycle Smart campaign that CalRecycle launched less than 2 months ago. As I previously mentioned, the iRecycle Smart campaign is a multi-pronged and includes ongoing development of materials and trainings for local governments to use or build upon the educational tools that CalRecycle has created. As you know, the messaging CalRecycle is creating is simple and engaging while pointing Californians to resources to get more information. One of the recent additions that I want to highlight today is we have a new organics webpage on the iRecycle Smart website. The webpage includes information on properly sorting organics, but also highlights the importance of food waste prevention in terms of reducing waste, saving money, and reducing the overall environmental and climate footprint. And Commissioner Ward, thanks again for that recommendation at the last meeting about including the importance of messaging around food waste prevention, something that we'd love to explore further. The iRecycle Smart website is also provided in both English and Spanish, recognizing the diversity of Californians, as the commissioners have mentioned on multiple occasions. And additionally, CalRecycle can translate print materials by request or as needed, just if that need is there, we're happy to do it. We're also actively engaging and supporting jurisdictions to use and adapt messaging and tools for their own uses. A toolkit webpage has been added, which includes ads, videos, and other tools that jurisdictions can use and customize. On March 9th, CalRecycle hosted its first overview webinar of the campaign for jurisdictions to familiarize them, provide them guidelines to using materials, and provide information about additional tools that will be available. So if you missed it, the video recording will be available on our website soon. These tools will include additional trainings to be announced, and we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from jurisdictions and webinar participants that's been very, very helpful. So I'll end here with a topic that I know is important to you all. We've heard concern today and at most meetings about plastic bags and recycling and the challenges there. The proper sorting video on our website addresses this issue, instructing Californians to check local programs because many jurisdictions do not want plastic bags in the recycling bin. So that's my brief update for today. I open it up to any questions you have or any more detailed information you'd like at future meetings. And just to reiterate, we welcome ongoing suggestions for campaign materials and other ideas. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Really appreciate your ongoing work on those fronts and all of the CalRecycle staff who are contributing to it. All right, moving on, we have a couple more agenda items, and I'll just quickly say, is there anybody who wants to discuss commission structure or management? I'm sorry. Too many things on the screen. Okay, Commissioner Sky.
So I have a question and a related offer, and they're related to both item 12 and 14. The first is a question regarding kind of our organization, and I'm curious if there's already an answer if this needs more research by CalRecycle, but when do we expect to return to in-person meetings? And will the commissioners and the public have an opportunity to continue to participate remotely? And based on that answer, I don't know if CalRecycle has an answer right now or needs to research that.
Kobe, we will research that and we'll get back to you.
Okay. So based on the response to that, I wanted to make an offer. Many of the commissioners also serve on CRRA or are members of CRRA. We're hosting our conference in person in September this year down in San Diego County, and there was an offer from the board to co-host a meeting of the commission in September. Specifically, it would be September 8th in the morning. I think it would be a great opportunity for having a great cross-pollination and engagement with CRRA members. It would continue to be open to the public as well. My hope is that both the public and our commissioners would be able to participate virtually, so that if it is a challenge for folks to get down to the conference in person, they could still participate. So depending on that, I wanted to make that offer. I discussed it with our chair, and she wanted to get feedback from the commission overall to see if we can move forward with that. But I think it would be fantastic if we're able to.
I love that idea. Anybody else? Thumbs up for Mr. Kalpkoff, Medrano, Toyota, seeing a few others. Okay, so that sounds really good. Also, as long as we're talking, oh, Mr. Lapis as well. I, as a person from the far corners of California, loving living in the remote area, but really liking my Zoom. So I'd like to be able to continue the remote logins for the meetings. It's also good for our carbon balance. Okay, any other issues on commission structure and management? We just got a few more minutes. So moving through it at a quick click. Additional data review and requests. Anybody have anything on that? Okay. Commissioner Schneider?
Thank you, Commissioner Ward. I'm not sure this is the right agenda item. I attended the League of California Cities Solid Waste meeting last week, but this also could have come from Community Choice Aggregate Energy. And to the compost people, what came up was, in a few years, any of us who are anaerobically digesting our organics will not be able to use biogas, or will not be allowed to use biogas because of another law. And I'm sorry, I'm going blank on that law. But at the time, it was like, I need to tell this commission, because I guess I've been in happy land here in my city with South City Scavenger, with AD of our organic waste. It's given us some options that other cities don't have. But if it is true that this becomes illegal due to other climate laws, this is going to be a problem for all of us moving into AD. And if the compost, I know we don't have the compost committee anymore. I don't know if anybody else is looking at this.
Is anyone tracking that law restricting the use of gas derived from anaerobic digestion in vehicles or other uses?
And I think you got it, Commissioner Ward. I think it's for vehicles, is if they phase out all natural gas vehicles, including garbage trucks, to go electric. Maybe that was maybe I need to do a little bit more homework, but I just wanted to give us all a heads up that we may be losing that market, which to me is a viable, valid market, but we may be losing it.
Sounds like Commissioner Lapis might have a response.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so this is an ongoing conversation for several years now at the Air Board, where they want to move to zero emission vehicles. There are still other uses for biogas, like pipeline injection. In fact, the Public Utilities Commission just mandated that utilities buy biogas. So it's a topic that's being discussed a lot in a lot of other venues. I'm not sure we necessarily as a group need to delve into it too deeply.
And does that have any overlap with the work of Commissioner Sky and Oseguera on? Commissioner Sky, do you have a comment?
It does relate to the technology policy that we had already moved forward more so. We'll look at the updated policy that we're working on now. But I agree with Commissioner Lapis. It does relate to market development, so I think there's some overlap with our commission, but I'll review it with Commissioner Oseguera and see if there's something more we need to address in our draft policy to address that issue.
Excellent. That seems a very appropriate response. All right. Moving on to next meeting and agenda items for future meetings. Anybody have an agenda item they want to throw on here? All right. Excellent meeting. Thanks to Jim Puckett and Jan Dell for putting together a presentation on the many issues associated with the Basel Conventions and their impacts on our plastics recycling efforts. Thanks to Commissioner Toyota for bringing forth 2 policies in a single meeting. Excellent work. And to all the commissioners for an excellent meeting. And we'll see each other again on April 6th, having already decided we're foregoing the meeting on the 20th. So our next meeting in April will only be on April 6th. And then our meeting after that will be in May. So if you have to-do items for the commission in the meantime, please keep doing. And with that, I'll adjourn this meeting and thank you all for your participation.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Ed.